a lot of women with lipedema have obesity that goes along with it. But there is a difference between typical obesity fat and lipedema fat. That typical healthy obesity fat, that excess body fat, will respond in a great way, and you can reduce that with a ketogenic or a low carbohydrate diet. You keep your insulin stores low, you start producing ketones because you're burning that body fat, and that can help a lot with inflammation, pain, volume, and then what you're left with still is generally this diseased lipedema fat.
If you've been watching, you know that I take my ingredients very seriously, but there are 3 companies that I have found that I absolutely love. Check the description for discount codes.
Hello, my name is Adrian. Welcome to our show today. Today we have Linda, the Carnitarian, to tell us her story and just to have a little chit chat. Thank you for being here, Linda.
Well, thank you so much for having me.
You are absolutely stunning. How did you come to carnivore? Was it because of weight? Was it because of health? How did you get here?
Oh, so this was a while ago, back in 2015. I honestly came to carnivore because I was just looking for a little bit of weight loss. It was this crazy thing where I was like, I had been doing a ketogenic diet, after college, and I was feeling good and doing Atkins and all of that. And then I had 2 kids and I had some baby weight to lose. I said, let me go back to keto. It's where I always felt best. So, I went into Facebook, and this zeroing in on health carnivore group popped up. And I was like, oh, what's this? It's sort of like Atkins. It's sort of like induction phase. It just leaves out the vegetables, right? So you're getting your meats, you're getting your cheese. It's pretty high fat, and there's really no plants involved. But that's fine by me. So let's do it. And I said, I'll do it for 30 days. And then I just never went back to the vegetables. And I feel so much better for it. And I did lose a few pounds. I didn't have a huge amount of weight to lose. So I did lose a few pounds, but I stick with it because I just feel so much better with carnivore as opposed to keto, with almond flour and vegetables and berries and all of the little keto treats that you can absolutely have on keto. I feel so much better without those. And so I stick with it.
So did you end up losing your weight? Was it a weight thing for you? Did it help you?
It definitely helped. I think what it did initially was sort of drop some of that inflammation from carbohydrate. So, you get that sort of like puffiness that comes from eating carbs, and that water weight loss happens. And if you stick with it, you sort of don't regain that water weight. And then I did also, it's a great way, like the carnivore diet's a great way to keep your insulin down. And so I was able to lose a little bit of fat. At that time, I wasn't getting any body composition stuff done. So I really didn't know like where the weight was coming from. But I did lose, in the first 3 months, probably like, 5 pounds or something like that. My weight after having the baby was, sort of, I would say 12 pounds higher than I like to be. I had sort of stabilized there at this like 12 pound higher than I like to be. And I got, about 5 pounds of that off kind of, I would say right away within the first 3 months. And then slowly, steadily, I noticed, I dropped another pound or I dropped another pound. And now my weight's very stable and I'm sort of just hanging out where I like to be. But it took a few years. It took, I would say, I'm super slow with it, like 5 or 7 years to sort of stabilize where I am now.
Wow. So it ended up being about way more than weight, but that's what you came in for.
Yeah, totally. I had no idea that I was dealing with issues that could be fixed by diet. And I had always had sort of these chronic health issues that if ever I would bring them up to anyone, they say, oh, you're just getting older. Like these are just symptoms of aging, or there's just, something with you. Oh, you're just sensitive to this. Like I had a lot of interstitial cystitis pain. And that's like a painful bladder syndrome that if you know, it is so painful. And it feels like a urinary tract infection, but you can't fix it with antibiotics. And basically it comes from having too many oxalates, which, that's the theory. I definitely was having too many oxalates, and the bladder pain is just like debilitating. It leads to anxiety. It leads to depression. You don't want to get out of bed. You're just in constant pain all the time. And that went away. And I was like, I didn't think I could ever get rid of that. I had tried all the over-the-counter things to help with it, and nothing really got rid of it. Also like knee pain, which was the first thing that went away. I noticed the knee pain went away because I was having trouble just getting upstairs and, squatting. And it was just like constant knee pain. I was getting migraine headaches all the time. And I was like, oh, I'm just a person who gets headaches. I just thought I was like getting a little older, and knee pain comes with that. And, something else that improved for me was that I started getting a regular period, which I never had in my whole life. Like I started this, not at a young age. I was almost 40, and I'd never gotten a regular period. And so then to finally get a regular period, I was like, oh, there's something to this for me. It's not just that, I have irregular cycles and I am, lacking birth control pills. There was really something going on in me that the plant foods were causing some kind of inflammation, some kind of reaction to those foods that was keeping me from really being at my best health. So there was so much there's even more. There was just so much that came along with carnivore that I'm like, I don't see a reason to go back. If ever I would do a holiday meal, like at the start of carnivore, I was like, all right, well, let's just have Thanksgiving and see how it goes. And I did, the bread and the sweet potatoes and the green beans with the turkey. I had this meal and I felt just terrible. The gas and the bloating and the just being so uncomfortable. And in the early years of carnivore, I still sort of experimented that way on holidays, doing the family meals, thinking like, well, I don't want to miss out on the ritual of our tradition. And so I would like dip into those meals and like have the lasagna, and I just felt terrible. And so to me, like, it's just not worth it. And now I've come up with ways where I can just stay carnivore through the holidays, do what's sustainable and comfortable for me, which is like just adding in some tomato for the Italian meals without adding in the noodles, and, not having the bread, not having the string beans. And I just feel great. And so it's become my way of doing carnivore, for holidays. And, so I have found a way to sort of keep it sustainable. And I feel so much better. Yeah.
So I remember hearing something about like down the line, you started having some different hormone things. Did I hear that right?
So I had not had my hormone levels checked until I was carnivore for maybe 7 years. So I didn't know like what was going on with me hormonally until I got them checked. And I was surprised to see that my testosterone was like on the floor. Like it was like really low. And I don't know how long it was that low, because like I said, I didn't have the levels checked. And I also was having some trouble just with getting hot at night. Now I am 48, like right now. So it was, I think about a year and a half ago, maybe a year and a half ago, I went to a functional medicine doctor who looked at my lab work and said, yeah, if your testosterone is this low, it's been this low for a really long time. And, we went over all the symptoms of what that low testosterone sort of causes. And I was like, yeah, check. That's me. Like, that's me, just like generally kind of feeling like low mood. I was not able to build muscle the way that I thought I should be able to build muscle. I'm eating all this protein, just like low libido. And so I said, well, I think, what do you think about testosterone? She's like, yeah, you definitely need some testosterone. So we did that, and then some progesterone to help with being hot at night. And that is really, it's a game changer. And I recommend to women of our age to go get your hormone levels checked, because it's not something that carnivore can necessarily fix. I mean, aging happens. Hormone levels as we age drop. And, even with estrogen, it's a good idea. So those kind of are the three heavy hitters, like the estrogen, the progesterone, and the testosterone, to get those levels checked, just to see where you are, so that you can make sure that your body is functioning optimally. Like I said, it's not something that, carnivoring harder is necessarily going to solve for you. But now I do the HRT, I do the pellet, and it's like every 3 months, and I've been able to build muscle. I'm obviously sleeping better. I'm not waking up hot. So yeah, I mean, it's very helpful. I definitely recommend to women to do it, to have their levels checked.
Same. I was having all these symptoms. I got down to a 21-day cycle, and it was just like 19 and a half days of misery and 1.5 day of relief. And this would repeat every 3 weeks until I went on progesterone, bioidentical, and it was a game changer from day one of taking it. So I, just like you, I highly suggest people, even if you're not having symptoms, to go find where you are right now. And I guess that helps you later on as you progress. And like, I'm only 40 and I've had these symptoms for, well, I didn't go look, it was 6 months. So that's not that long of having the symptoms. But, this is happening. I've heard some people say like 35 years old, they start having symptoms. And I've heard that we can be a little bit proactive with some of these hormones because it just seems to be happening so much. Do you have any idea why this is happening? Because I don't think like our grandparents were having these issues.
I mean, I don't know why, but, it seems that our environments are getting less conducive to being healthy humans, whether it's the water we're drinking, the air we're breathing, the food supply generally, because most people aren't carnivore, And so I've got to believe that contributes. If you're eating standard American diet and your hormones are tanking, it could be because you're not getting enough protein. It could be because you're getting too much plant protein. I mean, like, some people talk about the estrogenic, like soy, and how that's affecting people's hormone levels. I mean, I can't really speak to all that, but I think for sure the plants aren't doing us any favors in that arena.
And it seems like that stuff is in everything. And then I've heard it's even like what they're spraying our clothes with.
Yeah. And just the content of our clothes. So I think the polyester in general is also not great for hormone health because it has like not phytoestrogenic, but it has like estrogenic properties to it somehow that, like, men wearing polyester underwear, it's just not great. And, it's screwing with our hormones somehow.
Yes. I don't know about you. Have you moved to more cotton and linen and that kind of stuff? Because I can't even sleep in polyester anymore. I'd rather just...
Yeah. I mean, it's sweaty. It's not comfortable. Yeah. I mean, cotton is
suffocating nervous system. It feels like that. I don't know if that's the right way to say it. It's like suffocating the nervous system. And once you try on, like, I'm wearing them right now because you can't tell. Cotton pants that make me look like I'm wearing pajamas or I'm a hippie or something. And I don't even care because they feel amazing.
Yeah, it's so much more breathable. Absolutely.
Yeah. Well, another thing that's really interesting, I've heard you talking, you did a great interview with Maria and Craig Emmerich, and people should go check that one out. But you touched on how you had been losing weight, but you felt like it was mostly in the upper body, and people were starting to get worried, but you were like, I still have this body fat, and I still have my legs to lose. And I was wondering, how did you figure out how to reduce that, and what did it end up being?
Yeah. So I went down this path of like learning about lipedema, which is the condition that sort of leads to this for me. Lipedema is this adipofascial disease that affects the fascia. It affects your fat cells. It sort of entangles your muscle cells, affects your circulation. Your lymphatic system is involved. It's sort of a dysfunction of the fascia. And what it does is it creates this situation typically in women and typically in their legs, hips, thighs, buttocks, sometimes back of arm, where they consistently store new fat cells and they have a really hard time releasing fat from those cells. The cells become senescent, which is like what means, when people talk about zombie cells that don't die, they don't go through this process of apoptosis like normal cells do. So there's not normal cell turnover. The fat cells that become senescent, they sort of stick around forever and they're sort of dysfunctional. The signaling is not the same as it is with normal fat cells. So they are not receiving signals to release their fat stores, and they're also not sending out signals to tell your body, like, we're here. You can use us for energy. And so with lipedema, I walk this sort of fine line where I am, as you may know, I do like a higher protein carnivore approach, which is not low fat, but it's limiting the fat to a point where I'm still comfortable, like I'm not cranky, and I'm getting in enough fat. I mean, any doctor would look at my diet and say that is a high fat diet because it's, at least 55% of my calories are coming from fat, right? So it's a good amount of fat, but it's not so much fat that I'm storing way more than I need on a daily basis. And so I have found that to help with lipedema because I can slowly chip away at those fat stores that are so unwilling to give up their fat, and just sort of very slowly store more. And I can't turn it off. Like, we have not yet figured out how to turn off the lipogenesis, the addition of more fat cells. But if I can mitigate the quantity that's created by the stem cells, like if I can somehow mitigate the differentiation of stem cells to fat cells, I feel like that's my best bet. And so I've used this approach to improve my body fat percentage very slowly. Any woman with lipedema who's aware of it and is trying to help themselves will tell you they have tried everything, like all conservative measures, which would include, compression, manual lymphatic drainage, massage, ice baths, red light therapy, calorie restriction. They've done it all. They're trying really hard. And it is not a calories in, calories out problem. So I want people to understand that it's not that you should try and starve this fat away, because we need fat, like we need calories. You can't go through life, ripping at your metabolism by lowering calories and thinking that this fat is going to go away. It's not normal fat where you can simply keep your insulin down and open the floodgates to the fat storage, which is what a lot of people claim is the way. So, as an adjunct to like calories in, calories out, people say it's not about calories, it's about the metabolic function of those calories and what those calories are signaling to your body to do. And if you bring in calories that don't increase insulin, you're golden. But for people with lipedema, we're not really golden. We're kind of shit out of luck because the fat release system doesn't work the same. And so it's not just calories in, calories out. It's not just, lower your fat and use what's on your body. It's simple. If you keep insulin down, it's not that. I used keeping the fat energy down as my best bet to mitigate that factor. But there are a lot of other factors involved in releasing that fat. It's not just about more calories in versus calories out. So, that's basically sort of like to sum up how the lipedema is working for me and how I'm trying really hard to not store more fat. And, like I said, there's no fix for lipedema yet other than liposuction, which will just remove the diseased fat cells. And it's on the table, but it's like at the back of the table for me. I'm against doing surgery now, but maybe later on it might become necessary for me because lipedema will, if left unchecked, it can hurt your mobility. Your gait becomes off. People have just a really hard time navigating space when they start to get that large. And so, I'm hoping for me that doesn't happen. And my approach seems to be working really well for me. Like I said, body fat percentage has improved. So I'm hoping to sort of, like I said, again, just slowly chip away at this. And it is really slow, but that's what I'm doing. And I'm, keeping positive and believing that it can be done, through carnivore. Keto is so anti-inflammatory, but carnivore even more so. So, I'm just hoping that things don't progress. Stability with lipedema is fantastic, and any regression is like really fantastic. So I think I'm on the right path. I'm just going to keep up with this.
So some people had said ketosis helped theirs. And what is that mechanism?
So, I mean, if you're in ketosis, then you're not taking in so much, you're not taking in excess carbohydrates, and carbohydrate can stop you from burning fat because you are increasing your insulin, which insulin is the fat storage hormone. It does not allow you to release fat. So when people go from like a standard American diet to a ketogenic diet and they see fat loss, that's sort of like the natural healthy response, and normal healthy fat cells will reduce. And a lot of women with lipedema have obesity that goes along with it. But there is a difference between typical obesity fat and lipedema fat. But so that typical healthy obesity fat, that excess body fat that's healthy will respond in a great way, and you can reduce that with a ketogenic or a low carbohydrate diet. You keep your insulin stores low, you start producing ketones because you're burning that body fat. And that can help a lot with inflammation, pain, volume. And then what you're left with still is generally this diseased lipedema fat. And so
that's your good fat.
Yeah. So that's the hardest to get away. So it's not to say that every fat cell in my body is diseased and dysfunctional, just some. And it is, in the lower legs for me. And when I've done, like, this is sort of to bring out the point, like when I've done severe calorie restriction or when I've done any periods of long extended fasting, like my regular fat totally responds. Like I will get completely sucked out. Like I've lost that body fat. You can see my face volume will reduce. My ribs are sticking out. My clavicle is sticking out. The shoulder bones you can see. So that fat does go, but that doesn't affect the legs. And so it's really a frustrating situation, because when you go to a doctor and you say, well, I've got this volume in my legs and I'm so uncomfortable and I'm bruising and I'm so sensitive to touch, they say, well, you just need to lose some weight. And then you think to yourself, I just told you, man, like I am eating 1,300 calories a day. Like how much less can I eat? And they'll say to you things like, well, just eat a little bit less. Eat a little bit less. It's just about calories. And you're like, oh my gosh, these women are really undernourished. I mean, they are not feeding themselves properly. They're not getting the right information. So they're not getting the nutrients they need to build muscle. They're under eating on fat. So their hormones are no good. They're under eating on protein. So their bones are, suffering because of it, all in an effort to reduce the fat volume in their legs. And they just don't have the knowledge to know that the diet is not necessarily going to be the answer. Calorie restriction is not the answer. You've got to feed yourself well. And then you can do the other conservative measures. You can try, like I am, to just slowly chip away at it, but you just can't be so extreme, because I have seen the pictures of women who are really very anorexic looking on the top, and that they're starving themselves, but their legs still carry this really disproportionate volume of fat. And no matter how much you reduce the calories, I mean, they're just starving, and it doesn't move.
Now that I've recognized that this is a thing, I look around at some of my friends who've had gastric bypass or the sleeve surgery, any kind of surgery, and it's unbelievable that they did surgery on these people, because it's not going to affect their lipedema at all, right? That's not right. Gastric bypass or the sleeve is not going to affect those dysfunctional fat cells. And so they've altered their body and it's not working. I mean, I know people who've lost maybe 15, 20 pounds and they have 100 pounds to go, and they're just so frustrated and heartbroken. And so it's just crazy that doctors don't know about this. How can people figure out if they have this?
Well, there's a great website, the lipedemaproject.org, and there are a couple of great organizations now and doctors who are aware of it. So I would recommend people start with the Lipedema Project, go there, get some information. You can do self-diagnosis. They've got a little online quiz there just to say like, hey, might this be my problem? And then they've got a list of resources of doctors who are aware and can diagnose you with lipedema. And it sort of takes the stress away from those people because they can realize that going so far as to get a surgery may not help them as much as they thought. And they can realize that it's not a gluttony issue. They're not eating too much. They may be eating too little for their metabolisms to be functioning correctly, but it's not a calories issue. It's a dysfunctional fat issue. And there are some great people working on the mechanisms, but, as of now, there's not great solutions. Like people are talking about, there's some gene signaling inhibitors that are being looked at for therapy. And there's some senolytics that are being looked at for therapy to sort of, get rid of those zombie fat cells. And so there are these targets that people are now looking at for future ways of treating lipedema. But as of now, the only approved way of, sort of curing it is liposuction. Everything else is just sort of try it, see if it helps. And the conservative measures can help with symptoms, but they don't necessarily help with getting rid of those fat cells.
So here's what I've heard brings this on. And the reason I stumbled on this is I've lost, throughout my life, I'm down 170 pounds, let's say, something like that. So I've got skin I carnivore. It is getting better. I feel like my skin is doing so great. Like I want to say good job, body, for what it's doing, but there's still that skin. And so I considered having the stomach surgery where the skin removal, but I've seen some people after getting that end up with lymphedema, right? Because someone cut into their lymphatic system. Is that?
Yes. So lymphedema is a separate issue. It can happen. It can be apparent, like it might be alongside with lipedema, but it's a separate issue. It's an issue of the lymphatic system. So if you've got lipedema, there's a lot of swelling and there's a lot of constriction of the lymphatics, especially in the later stages of lipedema. And that constriction of lymphatics can lead to lymphedema, which is where your lymphatic system has a really hard time just getting the fluids out of your body. And then you end up with limb swelling, typically in the arm or in the leg. And it's typically asymmetrical. It's just sort of one limb because a lymph node has been blocked. But it's separate from lipedema. Surgery in general, including the liposuction for lipedema, can cause lymphatic issues that lead to lymphedema. So that's another reason why I'm so hesitant to go the surgery route because, like my legs aren't gorgeous. I'm not walking the runway, but I don't have lymphedema and I don't necessarily want to risk that. So any kind of surgery, you got to just take into consideration that you may have some unwanted side effects. Like lymphedema it's a scary one.
Nobody ever talks about how you could get your stomach skin removed and then you could have issues with your bottom for the rest of your life or other issues. But I want to say I've been talking to Todd, the Carnivore Cure, I think is his channel. And then there's Limitless Lindy, and both of them are looking into skin removal. And so I'm interested to watch because they both are very concerned about this. And so it'll be interesting to see. I guess there's some surgeons out there who understand the lymphatic system and know what not to cut into. So I'm really interested. I don't know if you follow them at all.
I see a little bit. But so, it's a really big deal. And you've got to make sure that your surgeon really understands lymphatics because it's a side effect that, like you said, nobody talks about.
So for you, when you feel your legs, are there little tiny nodules? Because I've heard for some people that scar tissue actually wraps around the fat cells. And it's another reason why your body can't access it because of the scar tissue. And so you can feel nodules. Do you have
absolutely.
That?
Yeah. It's nodular and it's painful. It's been getting better in recent years, which has been incredible. But yeah, if you push on that fat, it's very sensitive to pain. Basically, what's going on is you've got this webbed structure of fascia, which is mainly made of collagen. That fascial structure is thicker than it should be. Ben Bickman has a great video sort of describing the function of how this works, where the fibroblasts or that surround your fat cells in the extracellular matrix create this collagen. But with lipedema, you've got this excess expression, like this is going to get technical. You've got this excess expression of, I think they're called myofibroblasts. And the myofibroblasts create a thicker, denser collagen matrix. And so the fat cells are entangled in this web. It kind of feels like maybe you've seen like in Target or at the dollar store, those squishy balls, like those stress balls where you've got like a sport, like an athletic mesh around the little gel Orbeez, and you squeeze that mesh and the little bubbles pop out. So that's the feeling. Those are like the little fat nodules, right? And they're all inside this tangled web of thick collagen, which is very much like scar tissue. So it pushes on your nerves, it pushes on your circulation, and it pushes on your lymphatics. And so that's where all of this constriction comes from, and the inability to receive and send signals. It's like this thickened, like you said, scar tissue around the fat, and it encapsulates these clusters of fat cells. And that capsule, there's this like real physical tension between them that causes pain. So even for me, like sitting down, you think like, oh, I got to get off my legs. Sitting down causes this kind of like push on the back of my legs, and then the weight of the top of my thigh, say, sits on the weight of the bottom of my thigh, and that in itself is a crushing pain. And so it's uncomfortable to sit. So yeah, it's not fun. I try and stay positive, but like I said, it's been getting better. And that is also one thing about a ketogenic diet, is that those ketones are pain relieving in a way, and they can help a lot. I know like during times where I was doing extended fasting and I was getting high ketone numbers, my legs did feel a lot better, even without reduction in fat. We're just talking about a period of a few days or a week. The legs, they do feel better because those ketones help with pain reduction.
I've heard too that some of the events that people have that are triggering. So some people like Todd, he was 400 pounds at 8 years old, and they thought this was fat. This was him eating, which is crazy. And it turned out, I don't know if his is lymphedema, but his turned out to be the fluid. So sometimes it can be early on, it can be there, but sometimes, like for women, I've heard it could be giving birth to a child, puberty, yes. I heard, and yes. And menopause.
Yes, absolutely. So it's typically during times of hormonal flux and high estrogen. So there is a component that links estrogen to the production or like the triggering of lipedema. Absolutely. And that estrogen sort of affects the formation of the myofibroblasts that are causing this increased collagen production. So there's this chain. And I'm not as well versed as other people, so they can speak about it, more than me. But generally, yes. So there are periods of hormonal change where if you're high estrogen, it can trigger these things.
Thank you so much for fleshing all this out. I want to give some people some hope. One more thing I want to say is, with some of these hormone issues, we're told eat high fat, eat. Every time I personally do that, I A, feel sick, and B, feel incredibly inflamed. And I'm wondering if it's a contributor to this, where like the fat just isn't storing properly, or we're overstoring. I don't know. But for you, you said you're eating a higher protein. You're not doing 80-20. You found lowering that and eating higher protein, but still fat is what's been chipping away at this. Is that right?
Yeah, absolutely. And I'm with you. Like I was for a long time, eat all the fat. I was having raw suet. I was having marrow. I was having all the fat off the ribeyes and then some. I was going to the butcher and getting that excess fat trim and eating that on the side of the steak. And I got those health improvements that we talked about earlier. I mean, doing carnivore that way will fix a lot of problems, but it doesn't fix excess energy intake. For me, that did not help chip away at this lipedema fat. When I switched to doing a high protein experiment, it was like a 10-week experiment. I want to say I lost 3 pounds. It was like, no big deal. Who cares? 3 pounds. But when I went in for the DEXA, I saw such a change in my body fat percentage. I was like, wow, like it really mattered. So I've stuck with it for the last couple of years. And so, so for my numbers, I'm only 5'2". I get at least 80 or 90 grams of fat a day. And I really go hard on protein because it gives me satiety and it gets my calories up and gives me the energy that I need. I get enough energy out of the fat that I'm consuming. And like I said, I can slowly chip away at the fat that I've got stored. I think that when people try to reach a percentage goal, it becomes sort of problematic because our bodies need a certain amount of fat and our bodies need a certain amount of protein. And it's going to be different for everybody. And so if you really want to like get into the details of how many calories does my body need, I mean, you can do the math on that. You can figure out your base metabolic rate, and then you can figure out your total daily energy expenditure. Give yourself a little bit of a deficit, 10 or 20% deficit on that. And you can figure out, how many calories you should be eating to lose weight. And, all the bros will agree, all the calories in, calories out people will agree, like, yeah, that you're going to lose weight. So if you do that, then you've sort of taken off the table the chance that, well, you're over consuming and that's why you're not losing weight. So like, let's get that off the table. Let's make the calories in, calories out bros happy. Let's get our little deficit in, make sure we're eating enough, make sure we're not eating too little, but we're in a little deficit and we've taken our base metabolic rate into account. So those guys are happy. But then when they see you're not losing weight, they can't argue. They can't say, well, it's because you're over consuming. So then it's sort of like, I like to take that part off the table. And I think everyone should sort of try it, get that little deficit in, and just see, because oftentimes you can lose some fat by doing that. And it's very helpful with symptoms. So you've pulled up the DEXA here. Yeah. And you can see how my fat mass has gone down here. The first, you can see there was a bump. And so fat mass being 38.7, this is not my first DEXA. The first was on a different machine, so it's not here. But fat mass started even higher than that. And then I took a detour. Do you see how it went from 38.7 to 42.4? That was when I went back to high fat. And I was like, I had all these voices in my head telling me ketones matter. I should go back to ketosis and I should go back to high fat. And like, Linda, you're eating too lean and this is not sustainable and you're going to, wreck yourself. And so I said, okay. And for a while I went back to high fat and it did me no favors. I only gained a pound, but it really messed with my fat mass and my muscle mass. So I went back to high protein and now I'm down at 34 pounds fat mass and I'm back to like the, weight that keeps me happy. I hit 27% body fat, which I never thought I would get below 30%. And so the trend has just been really good using this approach. So yeah, I'm going to just stick with it. For me, there's no reason to consume more fat. I think I'm getting in enough to, keep me from being angsty, keep me from being hungry. And like I said, any doctor out there would tell you this is a high fat diet. It's just the carnivores get kind of cranky when I tell them that it's only, a little bit more than half my calories are coming from fat. They kind of freak out. But for me, it works.
Amazing. I love that you're sharing what works, because it is going to be different for each person. I hate when people ask, how much should I eat? And I do kind of feel, and maybe this is wrong, but I feel like your body tells you. Like my body tells me when I'm eating too much fat. It goes, and maybe I'm wrong because some people's signals are way off. But I feel like my signals can be pretty off and my body still tells me. And I feel like if your body needed that fat, maybe you would really crave it. It would just melt in your mouth and you just, I don't know.
Oh, yeah.
I could be
absolutely
wrong.
And there are some people like, I think for most people, anything between, 60% to 80% of calories from fat is a great place to live. it depends on the person. Some people get a lot of satiety out of that high percentage of fat, and some people don't. I don't get satiety from fat that way. For me, it's about, have I eaten enough protein? And I really do crave the protein. And then I feel like, okay, my day is done. Whenever I've tracked macros after the fact, I say, well, let me just, it'll be sort of towards the end of the day. I'll still be hungry. I'll have a little more. I'm still a little hungry. I'll have a little more. And then when I go in and I add that up, it's like, boom, that's my magic protein number. And I always end up like, if I hit, and everyone's going to freak out when they hear, but if I hit 180 or 190 grams of protein, I am satisfied. I feel great. Like I'm done with the day. And for me, that satiety comes from protein. It doesn't come from fat. So if I were hungry at the end of the day and I eat, a few tablespoons of butter, I'm still going to be hungry. I might be a little nauseous, but I'm still going to be hungry. Yeah. Everybody really is different. And so I think people should do the experiment, like I did. Try a high protein experiment and see how you feel. A lot of people just are so scared to try it because so many people keep, banging on about you've got to have high fat, you've got to eat a certain percentage, or you're not carnivore enough, or you're not keto enough, or you're not going to have ketones. But, ketosis comes from the absence of carbohydrate. It doesn't come from the addition of fat. And so I'm in mild ketosis. I'm not in therapeutic ketosis, but I'm in mild ketosis. And, it's like, do the experiment, see where your satiety comes from, and try it a few different ways and see where you fall, because people really are different. And I don't recommend my levels of protein for everyone. I work with a lot of people and I get them in 60% fat range, 70% fat. It really depends on the person, because like I tried 50%, just straight up 50%, 50%. And that gets me, lower on the fat, and it's not a comfortable place. I was like white knuckling through, I think I did a week and a half of that to try and see how far I could push the protein and lower the fat. And it's not a fun place. Like you get cranky. And so for me, it was like, okay, let's bump up the fat a little more today. We'll bump it up a little more. We'll stay here for a little while and see if this is it. And for me, getting in that 80 or 90 grams of fat is like my sweet spot. And so you've got to figure that out for yourself. Nobody can tell you that you're going to be comfortable at that fat grams. So, if anybody is telling you you've got to have 150 grams of fat, like maybe not.
My next question is, and maybe my last question for the day, do you exercise?
Yeah. So I get a lot of exercise. I'm in training, like I do ballroom dance sport competitions. And so I train 3 days a week. So there's a lot of exercise there. I take recovery very seriously. So I have, my days on, and I have my days off, and I basically do 2-hour workouts 3 days a week. And then I rest and I recover for the rest of the days. So yeah, there's a big calorie burn in there that's taken into account. It's important for people to take that into account. If they're trying to figure out how much energy they need to take in during the day, you've got to take that activity into account.
Lastly, I have to ask you about these spices. So you had said you had this interstitial society, I can't say it, where you were having the inflammation from the plants. Were you able to heal that, grow some gut bacteria or what, and then add some plants back?
Yeah. So the interstitial cystitis, typically it is super painful to have spices, anything acidic. So, tomato paste is like off the table, and spices off the table. And then obviously any oxalate foods are off the table. And I've been able to tolerate spices really well. The cystitis pain is like, I would say next to gone. Like most days, I don't feel it at all. Things that trigger that cystitis pain for me is not now spice, but stress. And so if I'm totally overwhelmed, if I get into a big argument with somebody, or if I've got some kind of something on my mind, I'll start to feel this bladder pain. And so stress for me is a big trigger. The spices have been really great, really fun, because I do a chili blend, I do a meatball blend, and the taco blend is about to release any day now. And it's a great way to keep the meat flavorful, interesting. For me, adding in that tomato paste now that I put in the chili is completely non-problematic. So I'm really pleased. It's been great to not have that pain come with the spices. And I had always included spices. Like I never really got rid of them. I was always, pepper, oregano, salt, and what other ones? Like, basil and cilantro or whatever. I was never so strict that I wouldn't include some spice or some herbs on my meats. Some people with an autoimmune condition sort of need to eliminate everything, but I never really eliminated everything. But that cystitis pain is like gone. It's so good now. It is such a better way to live. Not having that pain every morning is life-changing. Anybody with interstitial cystitis will tell you that it's the biggest deal. It overtakes your entire life experience to be living in that much pain on the daily. And when you have a flare, because it comes sort of like cyclically, when you have a flare, you just don't even want to get out of bed. You can't talk to people. You can't function. It is like a level 10 pain. It's crazy. So, I mean, Carnivore for interstitial cystitis is fantastic. And if you're out there listening and you've got interstitial cystitis, I mean, do try Carnivore because it's very helpful.
Amazing. And I love the spices because that can make eating more meat more acceptable to people who are standard American diet. So like for my husband and my kids, it makes it just more. And as you're talking, it's nostalgic to get to have meatballs, to get to have taco. I haven't added any spices to any of mine, but I would definitely do it for my kids just to make it more, hey, this doesn't have to be boring. For me, eating meat really isn't boring, but for them who've had standard food and go have school lunches and stuff like that, it'd be nice. So where can people go get their spices?
So the website is thecarnitarianlife.com. And you can find all the spice blends there. I talk about them on my Instagram, which is @thecarnitarian. And I mean, they're great. People seem to really like them. And I agree with you that it sort of gives that nostalgia. I mean, I love meatballs. Like meatballs are part of, my heritage, how I grew up. Having meatballs and sauce is fantastic. You could leave off the sauce if you don't want. But yeah, I mean, it makes it so that it's not as bland. It's not as monotonous. And some people really need that. Like to say that I'm going to spend the rest of my life being carnivore is one thing, but to say I'm going to spend the rest of my life being carnivore, only eating steak and ground beef and salt, that's a whole nother thing. Is if you open up the opportunity to get in a couple of other ingredients, like in the meatballs, there's egg and there's some cheese and there's the herbs and the salt, and I put in some white pepper, there's some spice. If you open that up and you say, I can tolerate these things, and not everybody can, but if you can tolerate those things, it really does give you a better life experience. When you are the weirdo in the room eating nothing but plain ground beef, it makes you feel a little bit less weird. And some people need that in order for carnivore to be sustainable. Not everybody can be that strict. And to me, it's better to be a carnivore that includes some spices and something like onion if you tolerate that, or something like tomato if you tolerate that, just something that can give you some flexibility. It's better than saying, I can't do this, it's too strict. And then all of a sudden you're back at Chipotle. So I think it's a great thing to allow people the freedom to experiment with recipes. And when people say things like, you're a carnivore, you shouldn't be making recipes, it drives me a little crazy because not everybody can sustain that strict of a lifestyle. There's very few people who can. People want to live like regular people. Make some recipes, have some interesting things to eat. And, I think like Maria Emmerich does some amazing carnivore recipes. And I think it's fantastic. It keeps people on the path. Whereas if they weren't there, they're completely off the path, and they're back eating, pizza and donuts.
I was great being super strict for a year and a half. But now it's like, well, looking down the road, I just don't think that we have to take all the joy out of eating.
Right.
It really is something that brings people together. I think we can have a good relationship with food and still have some nostalgia and still have some joy. I'm not 100% sure where that goes because that's where I am in my journey. I'm a year and a half in. And I think when you get 7 years, 9 years, down the journey, you find out what makes you the most comfortable, the most sustainable, the most, and what makes you feel good. If spices don't make you feel good, then don't ever add them. But if they are tolerable, I think that's great. That just adds to the experience. And I mean, yeah, a steak can be good with some salt on it, but it's, it's good to add. Like my husband, he loves that garlic and pepper type of spice on his steak. And if that's what makes it sustainable, then great.
Exactly. I mean, it's exactly right. Now, if you're sensitive to those things, don't add them. But if you find that you can tolerate them well, I'm not against people doing it because, the carnivore police do not exist. Like they're not a thing. So you don't have to necessarily worry if you don't have to worry. It's a personal thing. And some people get on so well with adding in some herbs and spices and others don't. And so, it's the kind of thing where you've got to do the personal experiment and see how you feel. I love when people do a full elimination. They can find their baseline, do that strict carnivore for a month, and then bring something back and see how it makes you feel. Then you'll know for sure.
In my heart, I feel like with long time healing, that your gut bacteria can change. And I'm hopeful I'm one of the people in the autoimmune camp where I can't do any spice right now. I can't even do pepper. I'm hopeful that I've met people whose gut bacteria got better, their inflammation reduced, and eventually they were able to add a few things. Sorry about the kids. Well, it sounds like we've hit the end of our time with the kids. I'm so sorry. Hopefully you can't hear them.
I heard a little something.
I really appreciate you coming on. It's so nice to meet you. Thank you so much for sharing your experience with my audience.
It's been absolutely my pleasure. So great to meet you. I'm glad we got to chat. Thank you so much for having me on.
Well, thank you everyone for tuning in. If you like this episode, please like, subscribe, and share. Bye.